So even though it's the case that we have a proto-fascist, right-wing extremist, evangelical party in control of every single branch of government currently, some people, if you can believe this, still think SJWs on college campuses with blue hair, they pose one of the greatest risks to our country today. I can't even say it with a straight face because it's so mind-numbingly stupid. If you see everything that's going on, mass deregulation that's going to lead to an economic collapse, an increase of the military, I don't know that I could take you seriously. As a political opponent, I can't take you seriously if you think that is less of a problem than SJWs. Now, it's not just Republicans who have this view. There are a lot of liberals who think that the SJW Boogeyman is the greatest threat to the human race. It's not the Republican Party who's currently taking us backwards with regard to climate change, something that could literally devastate humanity. It's SJWs that might yell at you if you try to speak on their college campus. So it's unreal. Like, it's honestly baffling to me that people think this way. Baffling. So, Princeton University professor Eddie Glaude was on Real Time with Bill Maher, and Bill Maher, he's someone who I don't necessarily think believes that SJWs will bring on the apocalypse, but he certainly thinks SJWs are one of the biggest problems ever, when that's just laughable. But thankfully, Eddie Glaude educated him on this issue and told him exactly what he needed to hear. And I'm going to show you the clip of that, and when we come back, I actually have more details to supplement what Eddie is saying here.
Eddie, is free speech on campus being stifled with students protesting controversial speakers? I mean, what about that part of political correctness, that you can't speak on campus, the home of free speech, anymore?
I think it's overstated.
Really?
So, yeah, you can imagine after Milo spoke at UCLA, he probably went someplace else and spoke without any incident. You think about Charles Murray at Middlebury, he probably wound up, which he did at NYU the next day, without any incident. So
you have to pick where you can speak?
No, thousands. What I'm saying, there are thousands of lectures on college campuses across the ideological spectrum that happen every day without these incidents. What you usually get...
You read a lot about it a lot.
I know. That's because it's sensational. Just like you, in your opening monologue, you talked about the weatherman. That guy, remember that guy in the weather report where the wind was blowing and the people were walking behind him and casually? Sometimes we report about what's happening on campuses in a sensationalized manner.
Okay. All right.
So that was absolutely fantastic. Eddie Glaude told Bill Maher exactly what he needed to hear. Are SJWs a problem? Yes, but as Eddie states, it's overstated. Look, if you have a splinter in your foot, that doesn't mean that you're dying, right? It's a small problem. It's irritating. It doesn't necessarily do you any good, per se, but it doesn't mean that your demise is inevitable, right? That's kind of what SJWs are. They're problematic, but a lot of people will conflate them to just the biggest problem ever when it's like, hey, dipshit, why don't you look at what Republicans are doing? They're in control of every single branch of government, and they are wreaking havoc on the environment, on civil rights and civil liberties. But nope, it's the blue-haired people on college campuses. They're the problem. So, I mean, clearly this is a story that is overly sensationalized, and we hear about this because this contributes to the victim narrative of Republicans. They desperately want you to believe that it's not them who's intolerant as they fight against our rights. It's actually the left who's intolerant because they won't even, let them speak on the college campuses of their choice. And Bill Maher's initial response was, you have to pick where you speak in America now? Why the fuck do people feel entitled to speak on college campuses? I don't get to speak on any college campus I want. If I wanted to speak at Harvard, they'd probably tell me to go fuck myself. I'd say, hey, my name is Mike. I run a YouTube show called the Humanist Report. I'd like to speak on your campus. They'd probably tell me to go fuck myself. They're probably like, who's this asshole? So I don't understand why people feel entitled to speak on any college campus at any time they want to begin with. But the fact that them being protested is just to say that that's a huge problem It doesn't even make sense. That's part of free speech. If you claim that these people on college campuses are against free speech, well, it's part of their free speech to protest. Now, I don't necessarily agree that they should shut down those speaking events, but nonetheless, this is a problem that is incredibly overblown, and when Bill Maher and even liberals buy into this narrative that SJWs on college campuses are this huge issue, they're unwittingly doing the bidding of Republicans and right-wing extremists who couldn't care less about free speech abuses when it happens to the left. And what's ridiculous to me is the sheer hypocrisy, because for every blue-haired SJW on a college campus that protest and shut down some right-wing speaker, there's about 100 more right-wing evangelical snowflakes who are just as easily triggered as an SJW. Tommy Lauren goes on Fox News and denounces anyone who dares to kneel during the national anthem. I'm sure your crazy racist uncle on Facebook has shared posts of people burning the flag and how he thinks they should be in jail if they burn the flag. I mean, why isn't anyone talking about how politically correct Republicans are when it comes to this issue and flag burning? I mean, the president literally called for NFL players to be fired when they don't stand for the anthem, but yet everyone's worried about SJWs. They're the boogeymans who are shutting down free speech. Now I already know what the response will be, but Mike, what about all of these right-wing professors who are being shut down and fired on college campuses if they say something that students don't like? Well, my response is, what about all the left-wing professors that are being fired for speech? This in general is a phenomenon that is incredibly rare, but in the event someone is fired, a professor specifically is fired because of political speech, it's usually the left-winger who's targeted, not the conservative, contrary to popular belief, which really speaks to just how sensationalized this issue has become. And think about this. There are hundreds of speeches given by right-wingers at college campuses across the country that we never hear about. We only hear when there's an issue. Steven Crowder speaks at college campuses all the time, and most of the time, he has no issue. But can you guess what happens the minute he gets triggered and starts losing a debate? Well, he becomes the snowflake and threatens to shut down his opponent's speech.
You came in and just said shill. And I'm really quickly get ready to give the microphone to someone else if you don't stop doing this, because this isn't the goal of this. What's a shill?
Well, I think you're getting upset because you're losing the debate. But
I mean, unbelievable, but nobody will call that out. Nobody will lambaste Steven Crowder for threatening to take the mic away from someone because he got triggered by something that individual said. It's just, it's so ridiculous. And individuals like Blair White, who's a Trump supporter, who's a political commentator on YouTube, she kind of blew the whistle on these right-wingers and said, look, if you're going to have a rally, then take signs that people can hold up to make it seem as if they're protesting you. That helps with the narrative that, the left is intolerant. She literally admitted that this is what some people told her that they do on the right. So the problem with SJWs is just that they're able to make a lot of noise because this kind of serves a narrative from the right, but currently SJWs are not the problem. It is the right-wing minority party who is extremist, who's proto-fascist, that controls every single branch of government. But for some reason, some people think that SJWs are the biggest problem in the world right now. There are SJWs on both sides, and I'd argue that right-wing SJWs are more of a problem. The difference, though, is that when a left-wing SJW acts like a snowflake, they get made fun of. When a right-wing SJW acts like a snowflake and gets triggered, they make laws. That's the difference. That's who the threat is. So if you really care about Western society and free speech, then you would be focusing on the right-wing party in power, not SJWs, because that's not an issue. It's not an issue. It's obviously overblown, and anyone who can't see that has clearly been duped by the right.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.